Hey guys, in this podcast we talk about different health topics. As we are not medical experts, we'd ask for you to check with your doctor first before using any information provided in this podcast. Furthermore, we talk about third-party views in this podcast. Please note that we have no intention of misrepresenting these views, and we apologize in advance if we do misrepresent them. Thanks.
Hey guys, what's up? Paul Nick here, and today's topic is the nature versus nurture argument.
Okay.
And I think we're gonna focus on talent.
Okay.
Does natural talent exist?
Yeah, and we'll talk about other things as well, like secondary health stuff. But the other thing I want to just briefly say, nature is is genetics and the things related to genetics, what you're born with, and then nurture is the environment or what happens to you as you progress throughout your life.
Right. So there's a big debate to whether or not you acquire certain skill sets because of your genetics, like you were just born with them, or whether they're developed over time.
Right.
And so when you look into genes and stuff like that, there definitely appears to be certain genes that affect ability like hand-eye coordination and stuff.
Yeah.
And so there appears to be something like when we label a kid as a natural athlete, is it because they've had more exposure to the sport, or is it because they were born with genetics that allowed them to develop capabilities at the sport quicker?
Yeah.
And so that's the debate.
Right.
And I think that you can if you want to compromise, you can say it's a matter of both. Because I think anyone would agree it's a matter of both. But I tend to take the position that natural talent doesn't even exist.
Okay, so the question is, if it is a matter of both, how much percentage is each?
Yeah.
So is it like 30% genetics and then 70% what you do, or what's that ratio? The ratio is what's really important.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why this is such an important debate is because people often ask themselves, am I naturally talented enough to become really good at this? Because people think it's a combination of talent and hard work.
Yeah.
They're like, so-and-so has worked really hard to get where he's at. But the other guy, he's just more naturally talented and he doesn't have to work as hard.
Well, so this guy's naturally smart. He just knows it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Intelligence is another aspect. But I think intelligence is more, we can determine that it's much more genetic than it is environment. Environment plays a huge role, but genetically speaking, IQ is often linked to genetics.
Yes and no, but let's talk about that.
We'll discuss that. Yeah. So anyway, I tend to take the viewpoint that natural talent doesn't exist. My personal experience. Now, this is not any logical argument. It's just sort of a personal inference I've made.
Yeah.
Is that I have been able to master any skill that I want to. Maybe not master, but I've been able to get good at any skill I want to, given I give myself enough exposure to it and I have enough repetitions of practice. And I haven't really seen any limitations in terms of not being naturally talented enough at something.
Okay.
So the one exception might be something dancing. I'm not a good dancer or anything. Or singing. And singing has a more genetic component than most things. But dancing, for example, it's often said that in the black community that people are much better dancers. Well, you can argue that maybe there's some genetic component to it, but ultimately, most black kids are going to churches, and the black church is far different.
Yeah, in terms of the singing style.
Yeah, the singing style, there's much more clapping, beating, dance, but making beats.
I think vocalization too,
vocalization, and so there's a lot more dancing. So you could argue that from a young age and exposure to all this dancing, that is why a kid becomes so good.
Yeah.
And so when I was a child, I was always labeled as a natural athlete because I could pick up a tennis racket and play tennis for the first time and be better than people who had been playing for a while.
Okay.
Not better than people who had played a lot and played seriously, but better than most of my peers. And then I was good at basketball, soccer, and different stuff like that. So I got labeled as a natural athlete, which actually when I was younger, I found it kind of offensive because I was I worked hard to get good at this stuff. It's through practice that I'm good. I'm not I don't just have some natural ability at this. So my story, though, from a young age is that it was maybe about 3 or 4-ish. My parents got me a little basketball hoop, a little toy basketball hoop. And the reason why they got me the hoop was because I had this tendency to pick up different things and throw and catch it. So I really enjoyed stuff that involved hand-eye coordination.
Yeah.
So I was always throwing stuff, always trying to catch it. So they're it'd be logical to get them a basketball hoop.
Yeah.
And I'd say about around age 5, I was watching basketball games on TV because I just absolutely loved basketball.
Yeah.
And I played on my little tight basketball hoop all the time. I'd create these imaginary scenarios where it was I was an NBA player and I'd run out and I'd do all this stuff. But I just got a lot of exposure at a young age, which made it really easy for me to be better at basketball than other people. And so that's one of the reasons why I dismiss the whole natural talent thing, because I know that the reason why I was better is because I had more exposure. But the but here is important, is that I didn't really have that much control over the fact that like when I was little, I just liked throwing stuff and liked stuff that was hand-eye coordination. So
Yeah.
was that a genetic thing?
And also the other thing is you didn't necessarily have, like, let's say your parents never got you that hoop, for example, or you didn't have the right environment to allow you to get better in the first place. That would affect your environment. But I think you're also saying the desire might have been different as well.
Yeah, so maybe I wouldn't have. I probably would have not gotten into the environment that would have helped me get better had it not been for my parents recognizing that.
Right.
But at the same time, like, was it because I was at such a young age I didn't have control that I did this? But because I did it at such a young age, did I develop skills that other people can't acquire once they're older?
Right.
Like if you're familiar with it, there's this thing called the critical period. And they say that after the age of 8, it's much harder to learn a language because of the way our brain works. It's less plastic towards language, and arguably, as we get older, it's always harder to learn almost anything.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine this, but a lot of times, like when you play like an athletic sport or any activity, it's really the major common denominator of it all is really your brain. Like a lot of people are like, "Oh, I'm not strong enough," or like, "I'm not coordinated enough," or "I can't jump as high." Believe it or not, a lot of this actually deals with your brain. A majority of it, and when we say that the plasticity of your brain is affected, significantly by age 8, that's an extremely important thing to note, because yes, you might have like all the muscles in the world, you could jump like, I don't know, 4 feet or something like that, but if your brain is not very developed towards that type of skill, you might not be very good at basketball.
Yeah, so what we're saying is like if you aren't exposed to it at a young enough age, then you won't have the capabilities to learn that someone else might.
And it's not necessarily because of a muscular disadvantage or advantage
or
from
a disadvantage
your body.
of building neural pathways.
Yeah, it's really a disadvantage of how your brain is organized. But I mean, obviously, what may be a disadvantage of how your brain is organized for one activity is an advantage for another activity.
So, like on top of that, let me just note that like when we look at the greatest athletes, like child prodigy athletes who then go on to become the best ever, they're always exposed to the sport at a young age. The one exception might be Michael Jordan, but people, like he was famous for his ridiculous work ethic of working like 8 to 10 hours every day for years on end. But like let's take Tiger Woods for example, arguably the greatest golfer to ever live.
Right.
He was a child prodigy. Like at the age of 5 years old, he had, or maybe the age of like 2, when he was on television, he had a better golf swing than most adults who play golf do.
Wow.
And he was on ESPN showcasing it. So why was it that he seemed to be incredibly good just from birth? Well, his dad was a Navy SEAL, and his dad was incredibly competitive. And he broke down the process of mastering a skill. So one thing that he realized is that he could manipulate how good Tiger Woods would be by what he allowed Tiger to watch. So he would sit in front of Tiger Woods, and like Tiger would be sitting in his like high chair or something, and he would swing his golf club over and over for hours, so that by the time Tiger Woods was 2 years old, he had seen thousands of repetitions of golf swings
and done the proper way. And by the time when he was 2, he could just naturally swing a golf club the first time he picked it up. So you might at first look, it looks like, oh, he must have had some genetic ability, but he was being trained prior to being 2 years old. And this is a commonality that you see with most child prodigies. Almost every child prodigy was trained a ridiculous amount at a young age. Like chess child prodigies, like Magnus Carlsen, the world's #1 chess player right now, he picked up chess like at 3 years old and started playing like crazy. And obviously he is very intelligent. Yeah, right.
But his intelligence could have been developed by the fact that he was pushed into chess so young and forced to play it so much.
Yeah.
I don't think you can find a single child prodigy, or maybe one or two that had these abilities without a lot of exposure before their peers had it.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to dive in real quick about this whole baby talk is that, I hate to, this might discourage a couple people if I'm saying this, but a lot of people are just fascinated by the eyes of babies. Like, they're just like, oh, they're just so cute, look how wide, and they just stare straight at me. But the reality is that the reason why they're staring and fixing at you is because they can't move their eyes during that time, because they can't process the visual signals that they are receiving in a fast enough rate to tell their eyes to move. Now, why I'm trying to say this is because their visual processing system itself is not fully developed. When you see something and recognize something, that's because you developed a visual processing system. And if you're looking at golf swings when you're like 2 years old, the golf swings themselves are embedded in your visual processing system. That's a very powerful statement. That means you're more attentive to motion than most people. And this is why, like, with babies stare at your face more, because they actually learn your facial expressions, which is more important than learning like your body language. So I just want to do that little segue
Yeah.
because
And that's why I think that nurture is important, but I think that we ultimately don't have control over nurture at a young age.
Yeah.
Our parents might, but we don't have control over it. So in essence, there is such thing as natural talent. But natural talent's not derived from genetics.
it's not
derived
it's
from,
not the order of your letters of DNA. Rather, it's from what you did at a very early age
Yeah.
because of
and
whatever circumstance.
an important principle to learn too is that what you're passionate about and what you enjoy often stems from what you're good at. So if I pick up a guitar for the first time and I can't play anything, I just like hit the buttons, I'm gonna probably get bored and like not do that much. But when I can play like the best music ever created on guitar, it's like an incredibly fun, awesome process.
Yeah, right.
And so I really enjoy it. So if let's say the kid got more exposure, like Tiger Woods got to see these golf swings. Now the first time he swings a golf club, he doesn't have to go through like miss hitting the ball hundreds of times.
Right.
And instead, he's just good. So he starts enjoying it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
Enjoying something is the greatest catalyst for practice. And I
Yeah.
believe practice is the most important to developing a skill, because what happens when you practice is you build a neural pathway, you build that segment of the brain. And so passion is a catalyst for practice.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that sort of natural ability that comes from exposure at a young age plays a role in your passion, which then plays a role in how much you practice.
For me, it's like a cyclic thing. Anything that you are good at, you tend to enjoy. And anything you tend to enjoy, you do more, which thus improves your ability to do something, making you better at it, which means you'll probably enjoy it even more. So that's the cycle I always think of. So was there any other types of, nature versus nurture things? I have a couple things
Well,
to
I
say.
think I just want to mention that, like, even if you're not naturally talented at something, and what I think is it's not genetic, because both my parents were not good at basketball. Neither of them were athletic, but I had a lot of athletic skill when I was young, and I think it was mainly because I had exposure to it that I started to like it, because I started getting good at it, and then I just practiced more. But even if you're starting like something like at this age, your brain is still plenty plastic enough to make you really good. Like I really feel that you could never golf and start golfing maybe like at their age 30 and be really serious, have a really good coach teaching you stuff, have a really good learning regimen, and I think that you could become a professional golfer even had you not swum before.
Another thing I want to point out too is there's a difference between what we call like your regular age and your biological age. People have like a biological age means how many it's counted by different markers, like how many mutations you have compared to regular people, how are your telomeres compared to other people, other cells, and your biological age might be a lot younger than your normal age. And for example, you might be like 30, but in reality you're 25, like your biological age is 25. And so thus your brain is more plastic and you can learn things more easily. So I wouldn't necessarily be like, I'm 30, I can't do this.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is like, that's one reason why it's so instrumental to stay healthy, is because when you stay healthy, you allow your brain to learn things faster.
Yeah, think of it like the major limiting factor, I guarantee you most things won't be your muscles. They won't be like your body endurance or anything like that. It will be your brain. Because your brain ultimately controls every action that you do and what action you think you will do, which is a very important
And the
statement.
thing too is, like, if you've built up a lot of stuff, it's not going to go away unless you stop using it.
Yeah.
So like, if you look at like people who are in the Senate, not senators, I mean people who are in the the Supreme Court, a lot of them are in their 80s and they're doing incredibly mentally challenging jobs. And why are they able to do that? Because they didn't stop using their brain. Like retirement, I think, can be detrimental in the fact that, like, now you're not required to use your brain anymore. You can just sit around. But what is going to cause your demise faster? Your mental capabilities will go away faster.
Yeah.
So you want to keep doing this stuff because, like, honestly, there's people out there who are as highly functioning as a 30-year-old, like in their 90s, because they kept their body in good shape and kept thinking.
Now, one thing I want to comment on is, like, let's suppose like Tiger Woods watched all these golf videos when he was younger. And he never became a golfer. Let's just say like he ended up trying to become like a scholar or something like that. I would actually argue that he would be at a disadvantage to become a scholar rather than a golfer, because the time that he spent watching how like a golfer swings is not very useful when it comes to like intellectual debates or something like that. And I want to almost postulate here that self should not scare you. Like if I was this guy who trained in like movement and motion control and coordination and athleticism, I still wouldn't, knowing that background, I still wouldn't be discouraged to become like a scholar.
This is what you need to know. So like, you shouldn't be discouraged. Like, had Tiger Woods decided not to become a professional golfer and become like a scholar,
Yeah.
he would be able to become a great scholar. He
Right.
could be remembered for centuries.
Right.
But Tiger Woods wasn't capable of becoming the best intellectual of the last 1,000 years. He wasn't
Right.
capable of becoming Socrates because he didn't have the experience.
Yeah.
Like Magnus Carlsen, the best chess player alive, was doing chess puzzles at a very young age.
Right.
And so that's why when we have that ability, we tend to gravitate towards certain things. And there's this whole idea that certain people are just meant to do certain things. Tiger Woods was just meant to play golf. Why he wasn't predestined by his genetics. He was predestined by his experiences as a toddler.
Yeah.
And that he could be the best in the world because no one else had had these experiences.
Now, one thing, I mean, this is another topic, I guess, but when you're deciding to do something, I would never, ever personally want to be the very best at one thing. Because to me, it would be so far beyond a point of diminished returns that I would miss out on many other things to do. So, I mean, just basically what I mean by that is, if I want to be the best, I don't know, biker in the world, and so I just, spent biking, I was, super athletic, and from a very early age, I was able to do all this. There would be a multitude of things that I probably would miss out on because I've dedicated my entire life just to this one activity.
Yeah, and I think the argument is that, you could reap the benefits. Look at Tiger Woods. He has millions of dollars.
Yeah. I mean, he's famous.
He's worldly famous.
Yeah.
And he's that, and he's considered. He's gonna go down in history as one of the greatest ever.
Right.
So he has all those benefits, but yeah, of course, he's missed out on other things.
Right. So it's kind of a fine argument and depends on.
Yeah, and I think it's a subjective thing.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend not becoming the best at something based on my opinion of it.
Yeah.
But I think but what Nick is doing is presenting a good argument to why you shouldn't go that route. Because I do think a lot of times the people who do become the best at it have neurotic reasons for doing it. I think Michael Jordan's extremely competitive. He can't allow anyone to be better than him.
Yeah.
And so when someone gets better than him, he gets really stressed and works out. His coping mechanism to deal with that stress is to keep working until he's better than that person. So he's committed himself to a life of hard work.
Right.
But there's been rewards that he's reaped from it.
Right.
And so that's where the debate lies, really.
Okay. So I guess now I want to kind of segue into different biological things. So this is going to be more on a health-based type of genetics versus so genetics versus natural debate. The first thing I want to talk about is a lot of people ask does your parents' actions after they're born affect you in terms of your genes?
During pregnancy? Or...
Well, even before that. Let's say okay, so let's say for example, my mom and dad were going to have a certain set of DNA, right? Mm-hmm. And you can say well, the chances of certain, because each sperm has a different set of DNA. So
could you say okay, so let's say an example of a father is one who decided to be a high school janitor. Nothing wrong with being a high school janitor. But then the same potential father instead decided to play professional sports.
Yeah.
Did it affect his genes in a way that will be
affected to
your
me?
Genes?
Because remember, when the father was born, he had a certain set of DNA, right? Mm-hmm. And the question is well, no matter what he did, janitor, professional sportsman, laid in there on the bed all day, it doesn't matter. He'd still have the same DNA that he would give to me as an offspring, right? And that's actually wrong. So the point is that you want to be very healthy. So let me kind of explain why that is, okay? So we have these things called genes, which are composed of our original DNA. And we also have another factor called epigenetics, mm-hmm. which basically describe methylation patterns and different patterns that tell what parts of DNA should be activated. It just so happens not only your DNA can be changed, but your epigenetics can be changed. And these changes are passed down to the sperm and then passed down to their offspring. So let's say my dad was out in the sun all day, literally all day. He would have a barrage of DNA mutations because of the UV light in the sun. So his offspring in turn would have a higher chance of developing different cancers or different diseases because of how many mutations in his DNA he'd have.
Is this arguably the reason why people have different skin colors? So let's say your parent was out in the sun way more, and they were getting burnt. So your body needs to produce more.
Well, actually, so
their body might have to start producing more. What's the term? Melanin?
Well, there's melanin, but this actually was a really highly debated topic. That's a different thing. But basically, when it comes down to it, there are some people that speculate that there's an actual mechanism. I believe it's linked to vitamin E, not vitamin D. A lot of people thought it was vitamin D, but actually some people think it's vitamin E. I believe I'd have to double check it. Uh-huh. But it's kind of weak. It's not very strong. but there is some evolutionary evidence to explain why some people have darker skin colors than others.
Yeah.
But the main point I wanted to talk about was that what your parents did as an individual affects the amount of mutations they have on their original DNA strand, like A, C, G, and it also affects their methylation patterns, the epigenetics that they did.
So basically, if you have problems, blame your parents.
Oh yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. But the main thing I want to say is, like, for moms and dads, like, you really should not smoke. There are certain things that, like, if you do, you drastically increase the chance of your offspring having, like, terrible diseases and terrible disadvantages.
Now, do you think like alcohol like mutates the body, so that's why alcoholism is somewhat genetic?
Well, there is definitely a genetic factor to alcoholism, but I don't think it's directly alcohol. I think it's the liver damage, and your liver can't process things very well, and so that aftermath of that causes the DNA damage. That's a different thing. But alcoholism is definitely a genetically traceable thing, but I would say the majority of it is yourself, and it's serious. It's very serious to recognize this. Like, when you know that in the family there is alcoholism that runs in that, you want to steer far away from alcohol because you are more susceptible to it. So I think that's something that a lot of people think to themselves, like, oh, when I have kids, like, it doesn't really matter if, like, I'm healthy because we're getting the same DNA, right? The answer is wrong. You want to make sure that you live as healthy as you can because that increases the health of your offspring.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah. So I think that's one thing I want to talk about really quick.
So if you need a motivation to be healthy, there's more motivation because your kids are affected by your decisions as well.
Yes.
So YOLO should be you only live once, and therefore you should treat your life well.
Yes, exactly. The other thing I wanted to talk about very briefly was cancer and how cancer is either a genetic thing or a nature thing. And the answer is it's really both. But depending on what age you get it at, it might be one more than the other.
Yeah.
Okay.
Makes
So
sense.
if you have it, like, cancer is really a mutation of thousands of mutations. Okay. It's not like one little switch went off and all of a sudden you had cancer. Okay. It was like thousands of different things went wrong and then you get cancer. So.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I just want to throw it out there because we didn't really mention this, but these mutations occur from a lot of unhealthy behavior. So if you smoke, you have, eating unhealthy foods.
Yeah.
Like, everyone is affected by mutations, but the healthier that you hold yourself to, the healthier that
the lower the chance of
lower
you
the chances.
getting a mutation.
I think this is also why you see families where everybody in the family is healthy.
Yeah.
And they live a long time.
Right.
It's a generation upon generation building up this healthy regimen.
Yeah, so not only does the mom probably has all these extraordinarily healthy, like, routines. She exercises every day. She only eats, like, fruits and vegetables, like, organic. I mean, all this stuff. Not only is her DNA and epigenetics good for her offspring, but her offspring pick up on the same habits that the mom didn't, so she's really healthy. Okay. But what I want to talk about here with cancer is you have thousands of mutations that we try to prevent, but if you're unlucky and certain mutations turn off certain things, you can get, like, oncogenes, which would kind of accelerate cancer growth. But if you got it as a little kid, here's the problem. If you get it as a little kid, you didn't have enough time to get those mutations.
Yeah.
So every day you get more and more mutations. But if you
Is this how they, like, made the inference that cancer was partially genetic? Because
Yes.
they said, like, look, this is their environment. This couldn't have caused this early. Therefore, there must be some genetic problem.
Yeah.
And then they probably went to to understand it better.
Right. So, like, they identical twins are a very powerful thing in genetics because they have the same DNA patterns, not necessarily the same epigenetic patterns, same DNA patterns, but yet they get different diseases. And you can tell how much a disease is related to genetics based upon, let's say one twin gets the disease A. Does the other twin get it, like, 70% of the time, 30% of the time, 100% of the time? That tells you how strongly related the genetic side of this disease is. Okay. The problem with cancer is like an umbrella for tens of thousands of different diseases. It's so the cure for cancer is not like the cure for cancer. It's like cure for that little cancer, cure for that cancer.
And it should be mentioned that, like, a lot of cancers now have very effective treatments, and
they do, but
we don't have we can't not, like, take back all that mutation that occurred.
Well, yes, the treatment for cancer I want to do on our podcast.
Yeah.
That's a whole other big deal. But I think, to sum up very quickly, I think in the next 20 years we will make considerable progress. And that's another topic. But the one thing I just want to talk about with this genetics versus nature thing is that when a kid is, like, 7 and they get cancer, and it's very tragic, but it does happen. The chances that it's more genetically related is much higher because they didn't have the chance to be affected by nature to get the mutations.
Yeah.
Whereas when someone is like 40 or 50, they have a higher chance of having the right mutations to get the cancer. That is why older people get more cancers than younger people, because they are living long enough to be susceptible to all these mutations. They have a higher probability of acquiring more mutations. Now, one thing I should mention is that if you are doing certain things like smoking, they will actually affect your genes, like the genes that are responsible for repairing your mutations. Okay? So you have certain genes like the p53 gene, for example.
Yeah.
And its job is to repair mutations, to get rid of the damage done. Smoking attacks the p53 gene.
Wow.
Okay?
Yeah.
So the mechanism that you use to repair your mutations is gone.
Now,
okay?
does that make you more susceptible to any type of cancer? Not
That,
just lung
that's
cancer?
why smokers not only get lung cancer, but thousands of other types of cancers.
Wow, yeah.
Because the mechanism used to repair and prevent those cancers is gone.
Now, could you maybe go into some activities that attack the things that are supposed to prevent mutations?
Oh,
like
yeah.
other activities on top of that, like
Well,
just
what
so
we
we
said,
can know.
yeah, so alcoholism is another example.
Well, okay, so alcoholism is like a drink every once in a while.
A drink every once in a while, it's pretty well established that that's fine.
Uh-huh.
But what happens is when you have maybe like 4 beers a day,
Yeah.
what ends up happening is your liver, think of your liver as like the filter in your body.
Yeah, that's what it is.
It kind of filters all the toxins out. But remember, your body views alcohol in great quantities as a toxin, so your liver has to work really hard to get rid of it. Alcohol is actually kind of special in that it disguises itself as water, but that's another thing. So it's hard for your liver to get rid of it, and even when it does, it causes some free radical damage to your liver. Okay, so in other words, the filter that you use has been compromised. So if you were to take any other toxins in, you don't have a good filter to prevent those toxins from getting into your bloodstream. So that means that those other toxins can become
So
carcinogenic.
this would also be like a danger of something like steroids that mess with the enzymes in your liver.
So if you didn't have if you didn't have a very good liver, then if you took steroids on top of it, then you're increasing your chances of getting even more mutations. Okay, because you can't like repair your liver. I mean, your body can to a very little extent, and we're working on therapies to like regrow entire livers. But for right now, the liver, that's all you got, you know. So that's one thing. The other thing I want to comment on is sun exposure, because as I mentioned earlier, the UV rays cause your skin, they go through your skin and they cause mutations. That's why you commonly see people who are like tan get melanomas and stuff like that.
But does it make you more susceptible to other cancers as well?
Yes, it does, because the UV rays, like you can get leukemia from it, for example, because the UV rays will pass through your skin and it can actually go in through your blood vessels and then mutate your the red blood cells and white blood cells. But not only that, let's say you just got melanoma. The melanoma itself can mutate even further and then through the blood system be circulated throughout your entire body. So a cancer that you have in your pancreas might have actually started on your skin.
Yeah.
And we call that a metastasized cancer. That means it gets spread. I mean, what I wanted to just drive home here was that, yes, cancer is related to genetics.
No, let me ask you a question that... well, actually, let you finish the point.
Cancer is related to genetics, and the younger you get it, the more likely it's related to what you were born with rather than what you did.
So, okay, so if you're saying that sun exposure plays a big role in our body's susceptibility towards picking up cancer.
Yeah.
So I would imagine then that you would see disparities between different races and cancer rates.
Well,
you
would think that, but you do see disparities in different types of cancers, but that is not because of the skin color. Okay, when you have like a tan, for example, it's like an SPF of 4. It really doesn't do anything. It does a little bit, I guess.
Like tanning oil, or like...
No, I mean like your body's like if you are on the sun and you have a tan.
Yeah.
That is like the equivalent of an SPF of 4.
Yeah,
which
but our
is
body
nothing.
naturally has like an SPF of something. To some extent.
That is the melatonin. It's that's the tan. And what I'm trying to say is it's not. You don't want to have over excessive sun exposure because not only is it bad for your skin, but more importantly, it's just bad for the possibility of the mutations that come out of it. Now, one thing I want to clarify is you create vitamin D by being exposed to the sun, and vitamin D is extremely important vitamin. Some argue that it's the most important. So if you're not out in the sun at all, or if you're wearing like SPF like 50 the entire time, your body will never generate any vitamin D, and that's bad. Vitamin D like makes you happy, makes your bones solid, lots of other things. So the whole point is that you want to make sure that you get some sun exposure. Like maybe you're out in the sun like 20 minutes, 30 minutes a day. That's fine. But after that, you don't want to like constantly just be out soaking up the sun rays.
Yeah.
So that was just like a segue. I didn't mean to get into that, but I just wanted to talk about like the genetics versus nature of cancer and why cancer is found primarily in older adults.
Yeah. Okay, so why don't we? You want to close on that? Or is there more?
Yeah. Okay. One small
finish
thing.
up, sure.
There's a lot of controversy about like other diseases and how much they are related to the genetic component versus the nature component. Alzheimer's is like an example of this.
Yeah.
Okay. Basically, there are different mutations that we've identified on certain genes that if you have, we say you have a higher chance of getting Alzheimer's because you have this mutation. I think a lot of people get discouraged because of that. They think, oh my God, I'm going to get this now because I have a higher susceptibility to it. I think if I got news that I had a higher chance of Alzheimer's, it would just motivate me to be healthier in general. To do everything I possibly can to prevent that disease. So,
well, I think you have two logical options.
Yeah.
One, you like sit in pity and let it happen. And
Yeah.
two, you stay healthy and prevent it from happening.
Right.
You might not prevent it from happening, but you will at least prevent other health problems. So
Yeah.
the logical thing to do is not to get held up on the fact that you are more susceptible and to take action to try to avoid it.
Yeah, I would like make this huge sheet. I'd be like, because even if you never got the test, like if you never got the genetic test that told you that, then you would have done nothing about your case. I mean, just as logic,
it's going to happen.
It's going
regardless.
to happen. You are susceptible to more diseases
just because
than the other person.
Just because you don't want to know it in your head and because you're gonna get it down the road is no reason to not try to prevent it.
Yeah, I would want to know
more information.
I would want to know my genes and what I'm susceptible to, because then I know which diseases I need to actively prevent.
Yeah, and avoiding knowing about it is not going to have any effect on preventing it from happening.
Yeah,
the only thing causes you to.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is like if you didn't know,
level.
Then you wouldn't be stressed by it because you never know. But then you'd also at the same time be stressed because you don't know. You don't like you're susceptible to something, but you just don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So anyways, sorry if we went off a little tangent on there on nature versus nurture, but we really hope you enjoyed this. Stay tuned to our other podcasts, and thanks again, guys. Appreciate it.